Hi, welcome to the podcast, Help Me Rhonda. I'm your host, Dr. Rhonda Karg, and every week I'll share information with you about mental health related topics, including methods I've used to help thousands of people gain insight into their behavior, learn new coping skills, and simply create more fun and fulfilling lives. I believe everyone has the capacity to learn and grow, so I'm happy you joined me today. So, a little bit about me. I have more than 25 years of experience as a clinical psychologist and researcher. I'm what's known as a scientist practitioner, which means that I'm both a researcher and someone that provides direct care, such as providing diagnostic assessments and psychotherapy. I'm so passionate about my work that I have my hands in many different aspects of mental health, as you'll find out. And after years of contemplation, I decided 2022 was going to be the year I start a podcast to teach folks tried and true methods for improving their lives. This podcast is another way that I can help address the mental health crisis in the U.S. because I can reach more folks this way. So the primary purpose is to help improve the mental health of the listeners. And the second goal is always to have more fun. So I hope you find this podcast both enriching and entertaining. So I'm going to mix it up on this podcast. Some weeks I'm going to be answering anonymous questions submitted to me through my website. Some weeks I'll be teaching you methods to improve your mental health. Other weeks I'm going to have guests on to discuss special topics, including this week. I'm so excited about the guests I've invited to the show, and I'm also very excited about getting to connect with my listeners. It's one of the reasons I still have energy to do a podcast after seeing patients all day, is because human connection just really juices me up. So this week I'm going to be interviewing Mouse. We were talking a few minutes ago, and I was telling Mouse how much I admire him. I know a little bit about him just from my interactions with him on social media, and he's got a really inspirational story. And so I'm really grateful that he's here today, that you're here today, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about you, getting to know you better today. So thank you.
Yay!
Thanks.
Thank you.
So you had mentioned before we started that today is actually a pretty significant day for you.
Well, coming up in 2 days, it will be the 4-year anniversary of my suicide attempt. I spent 36 hours in the ICU and 8 days on the Wounded Warrior unit at the VA in 2018.
Wow. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. So am I. I am unbelievably glad to be here, and I say it often, and it is true every single time, that now I am living a life I previously did not have the courage to dream was possible.
I get that. I feel the same way about my life. Like, if someone had asked me when I was 18 years old, what did I wish for in my life, I would have definitely sold myself short, way short.
Mm-hmm.
I feel the same way. So can you tell us a little bit about what led up to your attempt?
Yes. A little bit of the backstory without getting too much into it is it started young. I had my first vocalization of suicidal thoughts and ideations when I was 11 years old. My childhood was very traumatic with physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. And I struggled through my teen years. I was a cutter briefly in high school. Used to literally, oh my God, I set my hair on fire in class. I mean, way back when. And then, when in my early 20s, I started with SSRIs and had stayed off and on in therapy. And then I decided, all right, I'm 42. I'm struggling with this constant chronic pain. I had been told by 2 different doctors that it was psychosomatic. I did not have any hope for any type of treatment, and I was like, okay, I'm done. I was convinced it was not going to get any better, and it was no longer worth continuing. And I resigned myself to find out what was next. And then it was on the way to the hospital, or actually once I got to the hospital, that I realized, or the epiphany, that I hadn't really committed to this life and to this experience. And I had seen just how bad it could be without giving myself the opportunity to see how good it could be. So it was a conscious choice I made in the emergency room to live. And then I actually started to really apply myself, and it was almost like I became aggressive about my therapy and my treatment. I picked up a lot of skills in the months that followed: cognitive behavior therapy, wellness recovery action planning. I actually started going to groups which I had previously just despised. I kept with my one-to-one therapists, and and in 2019 I was able to start EMDR.
Oh, okay, and that served you well.
Yes, and that's also where I started to deviate from traditional Western medicine.
Okay. Yeah, tell me more about that.
2019 is when, after 20 years of SSRIs, I took myself completely off the medication and began using psychedelics to treat my mental health. And
Wow.
to be clear, this is not something that I recommend for anyone like, oh, I'm going to start microdosing or macrodosing. And no, like, while it is extremely potent medicine, the focus is on potent. That I had a very strong therapy background, and I had a plan and intention that I was using, specifically my method was using mushrooms with my EMDR therapy. Like, I would have my therapy, which was, I was a little bit of an overachiever, that my soft target was the second worst night of my life. That was my warm up. And I was having difficulty summoning the trauma, remembering the events, and even though I didn't have to talk about it, still bringing it to mind and then putting it back down. So I would go out into the woods with a friend. I absolutely had a sitter, have some mushrooms, and continued the process. And 2020, I also got my peer support specialist certification, mental health first aid responder, substance use recovery coach, and now, just since April of 2020, I've had 25 interventions with actively suicidal individuals.
Wow.
I'm literally full circle.
You know, I'm so glad that we're having this conversation today, because suicide is something that is shrouded in so much secrecy and shame. And I know, for example, the people that come to see me for psychotherapy, that's one of the things we talk about in the beginning. That's part of the consent process, and talking about limits to confidentiality. And if you are in danger of hurting yourself, that's a situation where I might need to, get other people involved if it means protecting you and keeping you safe. But that it's not something that I'm going to automatically say, okay, we need to go to the hospital. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times hospitals are not therapeutic, and that's oftentimes not the right choice in terms of how to keep these people safe. So something that someone taught me years ago was that you can talk to the person, and rather than talking them into going to the hospital, that they could do things to keep themselves safe. That's not going to work for everyone. Some people do need to go to the hospital, and I'm glad that you did, because I think that's part of the reason why you're still here, right? But for some people, they just really need to be with someone, have someone with them, get rid of any methods they've thought about using before, get those out of the house. If it's pills, take all the pills, wrap them in a blanket, take the blanket out, lock it in your car trunk, take your keys, throw it in the back of your closet, cover it up. I mean, putting distance between the person and whatever method they're thinking about using.
Mm-hmm.
Because, going to the hospital is a pretty scary thing for a lot of people. And I don't ever want people to not talk to me about their pain when it comes up. And to me, if somebody's feeling suicidal, most of the time it's either because they have this unbearable pain that they're carrying, that they just don't know any other way out. They just want the pain to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also people that maybe they're very agitated and suicidal because they had a change in their medication, because, as you know, antidepressants can do that to people too. So it's not always about unbearable pain. Sometimes it's a medical cause. But what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts about hospitalization and interventions for people that are suicidal?
It's a case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm.
My lived experience is oftentimes being a witness and being fully present so someone else can be heard and seen is usually enough. In my case, I had an epiphany and breakthrough in October 2019, where I was thinking of just how out of control my life was and how miserable I was, and I was in so much physical pain, and I was uncomfortable, and I did not have like a safe place to retreat to, and I was completely out of control and unable to make any kind of change in my immediate physical surroundings or in my life. And as soon as I had that thought, there was a suicidal ideation, and I went, "Well," and I managed to catch it. Just that little split second of mindfulness allowed me to catch it. So I again thought about just how awful everything was and how I could not affect any kind of change. And bam, again, the thought. And that's when I realized that, as disconcerting and scary as it sometimes was, that it was my damaged brain doing its best to comfort and console me, to remind me that I still always had a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's made it all so much easier now. So now whenever I have a thought pop up of that nature, I have a moment where I can sit back and go, okay, where am I in distress? Where am I feeling pain? Where am I uncomfortable that I am thinking of my like melodramatic options? And so far it's the I mean, every day is, I don't know where I was going with that. To get back to your question, yes, hospitalization can help. However, it's also, it was a shock to my system. And I know, especially from my friends with the VA, that every time we would go into inpatient, it's a merry-go-round as far as the medicine wheel, because you're taking off all of your medications and then new medications are introduced. So now you have to ride through the side effects of the new medications while still going through the withdrawal from the old medications. And yeah, it pops up just like you said, that now you have medically induced suicidal thoughts because of the interactions of your medications, and it's counterproductive to get to the root of what's usually a temporary discomfort.
Mm-hmm. Right. It means that you have unbearable pain. And in therapy, what that means is we're going to target the source of that unbearable pain to make it bearable for you. You know, in addition to the approach that I described a minute ago, in terms of like, okay, if you're feeling like you're having these intrusive thoughts of a certain method that you're going to use, let's find a way to keep you safe, to make sure that you're safe. That doesn't include going to the hospital. But also, mobile crisis is another approach for people that are suicidal. Mobile crisis, you can. I'll actually include that number in the description for the podcast today. The number for mobile crisis in Asheville, but if people are outside of Asheville, you can just Google mobile crisis. And what mobile crisis does is it sends out help. There's trained mental health professionals that come out and talk to you and determine whether or not you just need like the kind of intervention, peer-to-peer intervention, and then you don't have to go to the hospital, or if in fact you do need to go to the hospital, they can facilitate that. So mobile crisis is great. So if other methods of keeping the person safe isn't an option, then I would go to mobile crisis. And then if that wasn't going to be enough, if having them come out and talk to the person and calm them down, and if that's not going to be enough, then hospitalization, but sort of as a last resort, because a lot of people are not prepared for what goes on in hospitals. And like I said, I'm grateful for hospitals, for the people that they have kept safe, but it's not always a therapeutic environment for people that are already in crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I can most certainly agree.
Okay, so some people survive their suicide attempts and they have a new lease on life, just like you've had. It was kind of like this, I would call it sort of a spiritual awakening. I don't know what you would call it, but it was basically like you had a big shift in your mindset and the way that you were thinking about yourself and your life, mm-hmm. and what you needed to do moving forward. And so other people live through their attempt and it doesn't have that effect on them. They feel upset that they weren't able to complete their attempt, or they feel frustrated or hopeless, and they have that kind of reaction to it. So what do you think it was for you that it became like this opportunity to propel your life in this way that it's more amazing than you could ever imagine it being? What do you think the difference is between someone that wishes they had been a completer and someone who has this awakening and uses it to change their life?
That one's easy. Radical inclusion. 6 weeks after I got out of the hospital, I was taken to my first regional burn event, which is within the family of Burning Man and operates by the 10 principles.
Right.
And I mean, to be absolutely honest, I was still very much struggling. Internally, I was just this alchemical concoction that trying to get my new medications sorted out, and I was up and I was down, and it was just back and forth. I wasn't really stable yet, or not stable enough for me.
Right.
And I go to this place, and I had reservations, like, oh great, it's just going to be a bunch of hippies doing drugs and having sex in a field, and and all of my self-esteem was negative, and I had a very low opinion of myself and a very loud inner critic. And then it was when I showed up and I was accepted and I was included. And I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to earn it. I didn't have to prove my worth. I didn't have to do anything other than to just exist and be. And total strangers loved me for it, not knowing anything about me. It was just, you are here, complete as you are, and you are welcome. And still, obviously, a very powerful memory, and um, that was the cementing experience. That it was a combination. It was both being welcomed and included, and then it was at that burn that I had my first dose of psychedelics since I was in my early 20s, so 20 odd years later. And while it was initially taken for recreation and fun, I noticed the therapeutic events of it, or the therapeutic value of it the next morning when I woke up and it felt like this gauze had been unwrapped from around my head.
Mm.
And it was, oh, this is what waking up without depression is like.
Wow.
And just to have like that, like, oh my God, I remember waking up in my tent and feeling that. And initially I was a little confused. It's like, what is this? Like, am I still high? Like, no, I am normal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
I,
incredible.
yeah, that was it. That was the precipitating event that got me started and got me interested. And then I started doing more research into psychedelics and using plant medicine in conjunction with targeted therapy to like really address my trauma and not fix me, because there's nothing wrong with me. And this is the CBT talking about. I'm very specific or very particular with my language. There is no fixing any of us. There is healing, though,
Mhm.
and being able to look at what I survived through, to look at what was done to me, and find acceptance and forgiveness. And the majority of that forgiveness is targeted to myself, because as long as it was my fault, I was somehow in control of the situation, or and even as a child, that, oh well, if I'm somehow responsible for it, then that means that I was in control of the situation. And as bad as that sounds, even if I'm a little bit in control, that is a comforting thought. So by blaming myself, it was comforting myself. And
Mm.
that was one of my I guess massive epiphanies that really propelled my healing forward.
Okay. Okay. So tell us about how all this relates to the body image work that you do with people.
That was, I'm not a fan of using the term holistic because it seems to be like the catchy buzzword right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at my most unhealthy, and I mean total package unhealthy, around 2015, I had been struggling with my chronic condition of the nerve pain for 6 years now. I had stopped everything. I was around 320 pounds.
Mm.
I was embarrassed to try to walk up a flight of steps with anybody around me because my breathing would get so loud. It would take me 2 or 3 tries to get off the couch. I would get winded climbing in and out of bed. And there was this very unhealthy, oh, woe is me attitude. And then uh, as I started to work on my mental health, I was scheduled for back surgery, but I actually had hope for pain relief for my physical condition.
Mm-hmm.
And I was determined that I was not going to fix my nerve damage at the expense of my back. So I wasn't going to trade one out for the other. I started
Mm-hmm.
walking. And the more I walked, the more I became more active. The more I stopped being a constant consumer waiting to be fed. And again, my unhealthiest, I was parked in front of my PlayStation for 10 to 12 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
I did not do anything. And then I
Mm-hmm.
chose to get up. I chose to become more active. I wanted to be able to walk to the mailbox and back without getting winded. I wanted to be able to go to a burn event and have the energy and the physical capacity to go gallivanting around and have adventures. I I wanted to be healthy enough to have sex. Like that, like I wanted to have at some point, yes, I wanted a partner.
Mm-hmm.
And it was learning how to, or the relationship that the more I took care of my mental health, the more I took care of my physical health, and vice versa. So
Mm-hmm.
focusing on one helped the other. That once I started with the EMDR, and my clinician told me that, oh yeah, walking is a form of EMDR, which is why when you go for a walk, you clear your head.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. And while I will not run, I'm never going to be able to run again. That's just not going to happen. I can still walk.
Mm-hmm.
And walking also is my freedom that I can go where I want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that my body positive, uh, it's, I'm not, I don't care. This is the weird thing. So when it comes to actual coaching, I don't care how much weight my clients lose. It, it, it's not a thing at all. Like I care about them being happy with their results, them being happy with their bodies, and being able to take a shower and then actually honestly look at yourself in the mirror completely nude and like what you see and
Mm-hmm.
accept everything that you see and be happy with what you see and be just happy with the flesh vessel and know that, well, I created this
Mm-hmm.
and this is how I'm going to experience the world. So
Mm-hmm.
what kind of experiences do I want this body to be able to undertake?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's incredible. So, and I like the way that you sort of see the mental health and the physical health, those being so closely interrelated. And I mean, health and fitness, physical health and fitness is one of the best things you can do for your mental health. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
to like get stronger, and the endorphins and the other chemicals that are released when you exercise and when you push yourself, and I mean, it helps in so many different ways. And research actually has shown that exercise is actually more effective than antidepressants.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I definitely believe that. And when I started, I could do, from my knees, I could do 3 push-ups. That was it. And this morning I did 2 sets of 60.
Wow. Wow.
Well, I
What
had
a beat.
somebody compliment me on my shoulders one time, and like my shoulders and chest, like, okay, well, I'm gonna work on that now.
Yeah, right, right. That always feels good. Yeah. So what do you feel like you still find challenging? What are the areas that you feel like you're still working on and you're still growing?
I I still struggle with my sense of self-worth every now and then. I still struggle with depression. I still have post-traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm.
So I have triggers that will come up that I was unaware of. There are days and weeks where I don't feel like being visible and vulnerable on social media, where I struggle with finding words and believing that anyone is listening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I would say like regular run-of-the-mill stuff. Like, yes, I am absolutely amazing. I love my life, and also I still struggle, and
Sure.
I appreciate it now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That I see struggle as growth.
I do too. I do too. And like I say to people, the day that I stop needing to work on myself is the day I'm in a lot of trouble. Right? Like I want to continue to work on myself. I want to continue to have that level of self-awareness. And just had lunch with a friend of mine today and we were talking about it. And I have these epiphanies. Sometimes they're epiphanies that bring about a lot of joy. Other times I'll have epiphanies and realize maybe things about myself that I didn't realize until now, and maybe there's things that I did that I regret doing because I wasn't aware, like I am now, you know. And I think that one of the things that helps me a lot as it relates to just my own humanity is practicing a lot of self-compassion. I mean, I don't know if you listened to my podcast a few days ago about internal family systems and parts, and how our parts get triggered, and our parts, those wounded parts of us are the ones that unconsciously get triggered, and like we end up behaving in a way that we kind of look at ourselves and think like, who was that? That's not me. And it's like, no, you're right, it's not you. You are, when you're authentic, you're calm and confident and centered. But when those parts of us get triggered, we end up sometimes making choices that we later regret.
Mm-hmm.
And when two parts show up for a fight, especially in romantic relationships, that's not going to end well. So when you get triggered, my advice to people is always go soothe yourself, go take care of your big feelings, get that adrenaline, get your heart rate down so that your upstairs brain, your rational, logical mind can get back online, and you can remember the things like going to your partner and talking about your part and how your part felt in that moment with your partner, or to have that conversation. But when you're triggered and you have all that adrenaline running through your veins, chances are that part is in charge, and it wouldn't be necessarily a good idea to have a conversation with someone about how you're feeling in that moment, because chances are you'll change your mind later. So before you do any damage to your relationship, try to check in, notice when you're triggered, notice the physical red flags that you're triggered, the thoughts that might be red flags that you're triggered, and really just take full responsibility for ourselves, because our mind is the most powerful thing in the universe. Our mind is incredible, the power that our mind has. And when we treat ourselves with loving kindness, and we are our own biggest fan, and we can be our own therapist and validate our own feelings. We can, be that fitness coach that's like, I know you've seen 10 patients today, but you're going to get up, you're going to go get changed, and you're going to work. You're going to exercise as hard as you can for 90 minutes, and then you're going to feel amazing. But we can give those things to ourselves, and a lot of people don't realize that, the effect that it can have on us when we really do show up for ourselves. I'm sure that that's a big part of the life coaching that you probably do with people, is just teaching them how to how to have their own back, how to show up for themselves.
Everything starts with self-kindness, yes. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I was speaking with someone earlier about how if he wants to improve his relationship with his partner, then he then improving his relationship with himself. That, I constantly give, my awesome. And how are you pouring from an empty cup? And if you cannot look at me, if you cannot look at yourself in the mirror and say that I love myself, then how are you giving love to others?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before we wrap up today, can you send out a message to the veterans in our country that are hurting right now and are maybe thinking about taking their own lives?
Processing on that one, because that I immediately felt a little self-conscious, like, oh wow, that's a big ask. And like the 22 a day, and well, first 1-800-273-TALK,
Yes.
1-800-273-8255, option 1 for all veterans. And yeah, it's not something that you have to go through alone. And a convoluted way to tell the story, that I have recently learned that with my chronic conditions and still requiring so much assistance, I used to feel like I was a burden. And now I realize I am no longer a burden, because I love that feeling when I get to help other people. And when I need help, it is an opportunity for me to help other people feel that awesomeness, because they get to help me. So asking for help is no longer me being a burden. Now, there is still a fear that I'm going to ask and not get the help, and that
Yeah.
happens, in which case that's not on me. I was just asking the person that can't give it. However, yeah, asking for help is an opportunity for someone else to feel good because they are able to help me.
That's a great way to think about that. You're absolutely right. Somebody asked me to take care of their dog the other day. They were out of town, and I said, yeah, I'd love to go over and take care of your dogs. You know, it made my day. I was being really serious about that. It made my day. I'm the same way. I'm a helper. I like that. It gets me really boosted up, which is why I'm doing this podcast. I want to be able to help the most people in the middle of this mental health crisis that we're in, that we've been in for a long time. But let's face it, it's definitely gotten ratcheted up with COVID. I probably get around 15 to 20 requests a week to work with me. I'm sure you're inundated with requests too. And there's a lot of unmet need out there. And so I'm hoping that this podcast will inspire people to not give up, to keep trying like you did. You have I feel inspired by your story.
Thank you.
Yeah, and inspiring people to not give up, giving people suggestions for resources that are available to them. They can look into that maybe while they're waiting to get in to see someone, maybe professionally, or looking into like clinical trials of psychedelics for PTSD. MAPS, the MAPS organization, they have a clinical trial going on with MDMA right now for PTSD. It's in the 3rd phase of the clinical trial. And if the results of the 3rd clinical trial are astounding as the ones for the first 2, the FDA will have no choice but to approve it. And we'll all be excited about that.
Oh yes, I recently took their Psychonaut 101 training.
Oh, really? Oh, good. Oh, nice,
Yes.
nice. I've thought about that. I've thought about looking into that.
Hmm. Oh,
Yeah.
highly recommend it. It was very informative. And also, as
Okay.
far as alternative therapies, I am in a civilian program right now that is ketamine therapy,
Oh,
ketamine
great.
group therapy. Hmm.
Okay. Okay. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you, do you want to go ahead and share your contact information?
Yes, you can find me at Mouse Wilson on Facebook or Clever Mouse Coach on Facebook or Instagram.
Okay. Okay.
And yes,
Awesome.
Mouse is my legal name.
Yeah, right, right. I love it. I love it. I actually really love that name. I do. I do. It makes me smile. Thank you so much for your time today and for sharing yourself with me and with the listeners today. And I look forward to seeing you on the socials.
Yay! Thank you, Rhonda.
Yeah,
Very much appreciate the opportunity.
yeah, thank you. Great to spend time with you. Enjoy your day.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, bye-bye.